My name is Margaret Harrison, and on the night everything changed, I was sitting in the sunroom of our home in Coral Gables, Florida. The evening light filtered through the palm fronds outside, casting soft shadows across the terracotta tiles my husband and I had picked out together 32 years ago. Everything looked exactly as it should. The table was set with our wedding china, the same pattern we had registered for in 1993. Richard stood in the kitchen, humming an old jazz standard while preparing his famous coco vin, the dish he always made for special occasions. If anyone had walked in at that moment, they would have seen a picture of a successful marriage. A silver-haired man in his late 60s, still trim and handsome, cooking dinner for his wife of 3 decades. But I had learned something in my 63 years of life. Peace is often just a well-maintained illusion, and illusions always crack eventually. I had been watching the orchids on the windowsill, pretending to read the latest issue of Architectural Digest, when something shifted in my gut. It was not the first time. For the past 6 weeks, small inconsistencies had been piling up like grains of sand. The new cologne that smelled nothing like the bay rum he had worn for 20 years. The sudden interest in updating his LinkedIn profile after decades of not caring. The way he angled his phone away from me when notifications arrived. The Tuesday evening board meetings that somehow never appeared on the community center's public calendar. I am not a woman who ignores her instincts. At 63, after building a career as a trust attorney and raising 2 children who are now practicing medicine in different states, I know the difference between paranoia and pattern recognition. So, 3 weeks ago, I had begun my own quiet investigation. I printed bank statements. I cross-referenced credit card charges with his calendar. I forwarded suspicious emails to a private folder. I even created a simple spreadsheet tracking his movements, the kind of evidence documentation I had used in countless estate disputes. I just needed confirmation. And tonight, I got it. Richard's Apple Watch sat on the counter near the cutting board, its screen glowing with an incoming message. He had removed it while handling the raw chicken, a habit I had always appreciated about his kitchen hygiene. From where I sat, I could see the preview notification clearly. Natalie Chen, Assistant Director, missing you already. Tonight was perfect. The words hung in the air like smoke. My heartbeat did not race. My hands did not shake. Instead, a strange calm settled over me. The same cold clarity I felt when reviewing a contested will or deposing a dishonest executor. The emotional part of me, the part that should have shattered, had already begun preparing weeks ago. What remained was pure strategy. I stood slowly, picking up my iPhone, and crossed the sunroom with measured steps. Richard was lost in his cooking, tasting the wine reduction, adjusting the seasoning with the confidence of a man who believed his secrets were safe. I lifted my phone and photographed the watch screen, the message crisp and clear in the image. Then I picked up the watch and tapped in his passcode, our anniversary date that suddenly felt like a bitter joke. The message thread opened. I scrolled through quickly, my attorney's mind cataloging each piece of evidence: dinner reservations at restaurants we had never visited together, compliments about her beautiful smile and incredible presentation, a message from 2 nights ago: can't wait for Thursday, the Ritz has the best views. Thursday, tomorrow, the night I was supposed to attend my book club meeting. My thumb moved across the keyboard with surgical precision. I typed a single message: change of plans. Margaret's book club was cancelled. Why don't you come to the house instead? 7 p.m. tomorrow. She'll be visiting her sister in Naples. I watched the message send, saw the 2 blue check marks appear. Then I took a screenshot, forwarded it to my personal email, and carefully deleted all evidence of my response from his device. I returned the watch to its exact position on the counter, screen angled away from him just as it had been. Richard turned around with a smile, wiping his hands on the burgundy apron I had given him for Christmas. How's the wine, sweetheart? I opened the Chateauneuf du Pape you were saving. I looked at the bottle, the one I had purchased during our trip to Provence 5 years ago, and felt nothing. It's perfect, darling. Everything smells wonderful. He beamed, completely unaware that the foundation of his comfortable life, had just developed a crack that would soon become a chasm. Richard set the table with the same careful attention he always had. He arranged the coco vin on my plate, selecting the most tender pieces of chicken, spooning the rich sauce over the potatoes exactly the way I preferred. His voice was warm and familiar when he said, 32 years, Maggie. Can you believe it? And you still look as beautiful as the day I met you at the University of Miami Library. I smiled and lifted my fork, but every bite tasted like cardboard. The flavors were complex and rich, the kind of meal that should have been savored, yet all I felt was a cold weight settling in my chest. I took a sip of the expensive wine and forced myself to swallow. Across the table, Richard talked about his golf game, about the Retirement Community Board's latest decisions, about his hopes for our upcoming trip to Napa Valley in the spring. His hands moved expressively, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. Not once did he mention Natalie Chen. Not once did his expression falter. He looked like a man completely at ease in his own home, enjoying dinner with his wife of 3 decades. A man who had no idea that tomorrow night, everything he had taken for granted would collapse. I watched him the way an attorney watches a witness who is about to be impeached. I already knew how this deposition would end. I had seen all the exhibits. The story was over. He just did not know it yet. At one point, he reached across the table and touched my hand. You've been quiet tonight, sweetheart. Everything all right? I withdrew my hand gently, reaching for my water glass. Just tired. I had a long day reviewing the Patterson estate documents. The truth was simpler and more devastating. I could no longer bear the touch of a man who had betrayed our marriage with a woman barely older than our daughter. I glanced at the clock above the stove. Tomorrow evening at 7, the doorbell would ring, and when it did, the careful facade Richard had constructed would shatter completely. The following day passed with excruciating normalcy. Richard went to his golf game, came home for lunch, and spent the afternoon in his study reviewing community board documents. I maintained my usual routine, responding to client emails, taking a call from my son Daniel in Seattle, preparing a simple dinner that would not interfere with our planned evening. At 6:45, I excused myself and told Richard I was leaving for book club. I drove my Mercedes exactly 2 blocks away, parked in front of my friend Patricia's house, and walked back through the side garden gate. Patricia had been my closest friend since our children attended elementary school together. When I had called her that morning and explained what I needed, she had not hesitated. Use my house as long as you need. And Maggie? Give him hell. I positioned myself in the sunroom with the lights off, sitting in the high-backed chair that faced the front door. At precisely 7 o'clock, I heard a car pull into our driveway. Through the window, I watched a young woman emerge from a silver Tesla. She could not have been more than 35, dressed in a fitted black dress more appropriate for a nightclub than a married man's home. Her hair was professionally styled, her makeup flawless. In her hands, she carried a small gift bag with tissue paper spilling over the top. Richard had been in the living room, and I heard his footsteps quicken toward the door, but I moved faster. I crossed the hallway and reached the entrance just as the doorbell chimed. Richard froze behind me, his face draining of color so quickly I could see it even in the dim light. I'll get it, darling, I said evenly. You weren't expecting anyone, were you? His mouth opened but no sound emerged. I turned the handle and opened the door wide. The young woman's smile was bright and expectant, but it vanished the instant she saw me. Her eyes widened, darting from me to Richard, who had now appeared at my shoulder. She looked like a deer caught in headlights, her grip tightening on the gift bag until the handles crumpled. Hello, I said pleasantly. You must be Natalie. Please, come in. Natalie's heels clicked against the marble entryway as she stepped inside with all the enthusiasm of someone entering a courtroom. I gestured toward the living room. Please, have a seat. I was just about to make some coffee. Richard, why don't you keep our guest company? In the kitchen, I moved with deliberate calm. I opened the cabinet and reached past our Wedgwood cups, the set we received as a wedding gift from Richard's parents. Instead, I pulled out a plain white mug from the back, the kind you might give to a plumber who stops by to fix a leak. I filled it with lukewarm tap water. Then I prepared 2 cups of coffee in our finest china, adding cream and sugar to mine, exactly as I had done every morning for 32 years. When I returned to the living room, Richard was perched on the edge of the sofa, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Natalie sat in the armchair, spine rigid, the gift bag clutched against her chest like a shield. I set the white mug on the coffee table in front of her without a coaster. Then I placed the 2 china cups on the mahogany side table, settling into the sofa beside Richard. "So, Natalie," I said warmly, as if we were old friends catching up, "Richard has told me so much about your work as assistant director. How are you finding the position? I imagine working closely with the executive team must be quite demanding." Her throat moved as she swallowed hard. "Yes, Mrs. Harrison, it's challenging but rewarding. Please, call me Margaret. After all, if you're going to be spending time with my husband, we should be on a first-name basis." I took a sip of my coffee, letting the silence stretch. I was just telling Richard this morning that we need to finalize our plans for Napa Valley. We have a wine tour booked in April, the same trip we take every year for our anniversary. Have you ever been to wine country, Natalie? Her face had gone pale. "No, ma'am, I haven't. You should go someday, with someone who can appreciate it properly." I set my cup down with a delicate clink. Richard and I fell in love with it on our 15th anniversary. We've been back every year since. It's one of those traditions you build when you've been married as long as we have. Richard's jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscle jumping. Natalie stared at the white mug in front of her as if it confirmed everything she feared. She did not belong here. She was not part of this carefully constructed life. She was a distraction, easily discarded. I let the silence grow heavy before I continued. "That's a lovely dress, Natalie, though I must say, it seems a bit formal for a casual evening visit. Were you planning to go somewhere special afterward?" She opened her mouth, closed it, then managed a whisper. "I should go. I'm sorry for the intrusion." "Nonsense. You just arrived. At least finish your water," I smiled. "Unless there's somewhere else you need to be?" She stood abruptly, leaving the mug untouched and the gift bag abandoned on the chair. "I really do need to leave. I apologize for the confusion." I walked her to the door with the same graciousness I would show any guest. "Drive safely, Natalie. The roads can be tricky at night." When the door closed behind her, I stood in the entryway for a long moment, listening to her car engine start and fade into the distance. Then I turned. Richard had not moved from the sofa. His head was bowed, his hands still clasped, as if prayer might somehow undo what had just happened. I walked to my study and returned with the folder I had prepared the previous night. Inside were printed bank statements showing charges at the Ritz-Carlton, Venmo transfers labeled "dinner and thanks," text message screenshots, credit card receipts from jewelry stores I had never received gifts from, and a timeline I had constructed documenting every inconsistency over the past 6 weeks. I dropped the folder on the coffee table in front of him. Papers slid across the glass surface like accusations spreading before a jury. "Margaret, please. I can explain. This was a mistake, a moment of weakness. She means nothing to me." I sat down in the chair Natalie had vacated and looked at the man I had spent 32 years of my life with. "The problem with that defense, Richard, is that I spent 3 decades as an attorney. And I know that it meant nothing is not a justification. It's an admission that you threw away something valuable for something worthless, which makes you either a liar or a fool, possibly both." His shoulders collapsed. "What do you want me to say? I made a mistake. I was flattered by the attention. I felt old, invisible, and she made me feel relevant again. So you risked our marriage, our reputation, and potentially your position on the community board for an ego boost?" I leaned forward. "Let me tell you what happens next. Tomorrow morning, you will resign from the board. You will cite personal reasons. You will do this before I am forced to submit the evidence I have compiled to the board president." His head snapped up. "Margaret, please, that board position is all I have left. You should have thought about that before you decided to have an affair with someone young enough to be our daughter." I stood. "I have already contacted Thomas Garrett about representing me in the divorce. Your behavior constitutes adultery under Florida law, which means I am entitled to a larger portion of our marital assets. The house, the investment accounts, your pension, all of it will be evaluated. And given that you used marital funds for your affair, I will be pursuing reimbursement. I walked toward the stairs leading to our bedroom, then paused. I've prepared the guest room for you. I suggest you sleep there tonight. Tomorrow, we can discuss the logistics of you finding somewhere else to live. That night, I lay in the bed I had shared with Richard for over 3 decades and felt nothing but a strange sense of relief. The marriage had ended months ago. Tonight was simply the paperwork catching up to reality. The following weeks moved with the cold efficiency of a well-executed estate plan. Richard resigned from the community board as I had instructed, citing health concerns. The resignation made the local newsletter, and the speculation began immediately. I let it run its course. The truth would come out eventually, and when it did, it would not be from me. I met with Thomas Garrett, a divorce attorney I had opposed in court numerous times and respected greatly. He reviewed my documentation with the appreciation of one professional for another's thorough work. "You've built an airtight case, Margaret. I don't think this will go to trial. His attorney will recommend settlement." He was right. Richard's attorney contacted us within 2 weeks with a proposed settlement. It was inadequate. Thomas countered with a detailed accounting of every marital fund Richard had used for his affair, every lie that had cost me emotional distress, every breach of the fiduciary duty spouses owe each other. The second offer was substantially better. As for Natalie Chen, I had considered the question carefully. She was an adult who had made her own choices, but she had also pursued a married man and been complicit in his deception. I compiled a separate folder with screenshots of their text messages, including several sent during business hours using company phones. I enclosed a brief letter explaining that while I had no desire to ruin her career, I felt the executive director of the community center deserved to know that company resources were being used for personal affairs. I mailed it anonymously. 2 weeks later, I heard through mutual friends that Natalie Chen had quietly left her position and moved to Atlanta. The executive director had apparently initiated an investigation into workplace conduct violations. No formal charges were filed, but her departure was noted as voluntary resignation. The divorce was finalized 4 months after that dinner party for 3. The house was sold, and after the mortgage was cleared and assets divided, I walked away with enough to purchase a beautiful waterfront condo in Coconut Grove and secure my retirement without touching my law firm's partnership distribution. Richard moved into a modest apartment in Kendall and took a part-time consulting position to supplement his reduced income. On a warm afternoon in October, nearly 6 months after everything had changed, I stood on my new balcony overlooking Biscayne Bay. The water sparkled in the sunlight, sailboats drifting across the horizon. My daughter Emily had visited the previous weekend, bringing my 2 grandchildren. We had walked along the marina, eaten gelato, and talked about everything except Richard. She had hugged me before leaving and whispered, "I'm proud of you, Mom. You taught me that staying in something broken isn't strength, it's just fear." My phone buzzed with an email notification. The Florida Bar Association, confirming my registration for their annual conference in Miami Beach. At 63, I was not winding down my career. I was entering a new phase of it, consulting on complex estate disputes and mentoring younger attorneys. The work energized me in a way it had not in years. As I stood there watching the bay, my phone buzzed again. This time, a text message from Richard. "Can we talk? I miss what we had." I looked at the words for a long moment. Then I blocked the number and deleted the message without responding. What we had was gone, built on a foundation that had proven unsound. What I had now was something far more valuable. A life built entirely on my own terms. I poured myself a glass of Sancerre, the same wine Richard had always dismissed as too dry, and raised it toward the horizon, to freedom, to clarity, to the courage it takes to walk away from comfort and into truth. If you connected with my story, I would love to hear from you. Tell me what city you are listening from, and remember that it is never too late to choose yourself, Your support helps bring more real stories to this channel.